We're live now.
So I have to say something. We are live now.
Splendid. So welcome everyone to the first Inspiration, Insights and Learning webinar series. I'm really honored to be running this with NITI Aayog, the Government of India's think tank. And we have a stellar panel to work with today to look at the use of digital financial infrastructure in a time of COVID and hopefully beyond. I have 5 panelists with me. Shri Amitabh Kant will join later, I hope. He has been summoned to the Prime Minister's office, and so we have Shri Rakesh Ranjan, the Deputy Director and General and the Coordinator for the Aspirational Districts Programme of NITI Aayog with us, a fantastic substitute. We have with us Greta Bull, the CEO of CGAP at the World Bank, another think tank at the World Bank. Dilip Asbe, the MD of the National Payments Corporation of India. Joining us in that spectacularly empty chair at the moment will be Rajnish Kumar, the Chairman of the State Bank of India. He's running a little bit late. And also we have the pleasure of Mr. Harry Menon, the Country Director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So first of all, let me thank the panelists. It's tremendously kind of you to spare your precious time in this frenetic era when we're all running around like crazy trying to respond to the impact of COVID-19 and the damage it is doing, particularly to the more vulnerable sections of our society. So thank you again. And we are going to cover 5 topics together. And the first one is the role of digital financial infrastructure in situations like the COVID-19 pandemic. 420 million people have received over 7.5 billion in cash transfers since the 26th of March in India. $7.5 billion of cash transfers to 420 million people. An extraordinary achievement. And one element of it which particularly pleases me is that of that, 200 million women were specifically targeted through the PMJDY, which we'll talk about in due course, the bank account for poor people. And I think that the government of India has done a great job in using this opportunity to specifically address women and funnel these payments to women. So let's unpack that a little bit with Rakesh ji. Rakesh, the government of India announced the Prime Minister's Garib Kalyan Yojana on the 26th of March, as I said. You've delivered an extraordinary amount of money to a huge number of people. And the payments started within 5 days of the announcement. Given the scale and the complexity, how did you do it? How was this managed?
Yeah, Graham, as you said, when this crisis struck us and the immediate relief was needed, it was almost on a click of a button that the money was transferred. So, as I said, that behind that click of a button, there is a year of preparation, if you can put it like that. Because not long ago, if I can take some 2-3 minutes to explain it, not long ago, India, a large number of Indians did not have either the digital identification system or even the paper identification system. So the first thing that Government of India, our concern was for last so many years, is that how do we make the transfer payment which is very effective, very fast, which does not have the duplication and does not have the leakage. Now, if that was the case, there are 3 or 4 steps that Government of India took. The first one I would say is that give some kind of digital identification, which we call Aadhaar, which is in English you can translate it roughly as base. But what it means is that 12-digit verifiable identification number to every person, which captures, while we provide that number under Aadhaar, and my friends panelists will be they are great expert on this, but while we capture this number, the biometric as well as the demographic features of the persons are captured in that. The second step that Government of India did, and that was again very Herculean, was that at least bring these people to the formal banking system by opening the bank account. And there was a mission mode approach in last few years. We call it Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. The idea was very simple: let everybody has a bank account in India. So if I can quote some figures, between 2014 to 2017, as per the World Index report, wherever accounts were opened in the world, 55% of those accounts were opened in India. And there was around 380 million accounts opened under PMJDY, of which I would also say with great pride that more than 53% were to the women account holders. So in one go, what you did in this particular mission mode approach of the Honorable Prime Minister of India was that to open an account, give empowerment to women, and match it with the Aadhaar system so that it does not have any duplication, and we have the digital identification system plus the account. The third thing, which is very much, you can do these 2 things, but it will not lead you anywhere. It is just necessary. So the third thing, for which my friend panelist is there, is that the great stride that India made on what we call as interoperable payment system. I will not, because he would be, it is his right to speak on this. But what I mean to say is that it's a seamless payment system, interoperable, which has made it possible for this system to be really in place. Now, if you really look at the government system, we need experience. So what another very much a particular emphasis that Government of India had was that we would transfer a good part of the benefits or the remuneration or the fees through the direct benefit transfer scheme. So it is not that immediately that after COVID that we have been working with the system. It has been the years of the experience that the 56 ministries of Government of India working through large number of schemes have been providing payments through the direct benefit transfer to the account of the people. So if all this thing, I mean, in a way you can say we were lucky. On another say, you can say that it has been years of preparation, because we were solving the problem of seeing that the subsidies or the transfer payment reaches to the people for whom it is intended. And it is because of that, these structures, whether you call it Aadhaar, whether you call it Jan Dhan, whether we call it the payment system. And one more thing which I would also say is that India has been fortunate enough to have a huge mobile penetration. We have 1.2 billion mobile registration with, and also there is one more fact which we must not forget, is that the rate of the data transfer and the price of the data transfer in India is one of the cheapest in the world. So what we did was, and this is where the private sector has played a tremendous role by making the telephone, the data transfer system very, very cheap and affordable to millions of Indians. It is these kind of combination which allowed us behind that particular click of button.
Super. Of course, I must remind everyone that luck is 98% preparation and 2% chance. So that preparation over a decade has really paid off in these times, I think. And it's extraordinary to think that really we've got to a stage now where almost everyone in India has both biometric identity and a bank account. I mean, that is really quite some achievement. So that, I think that's really a great background. it leads us to begin to unpack those three core elements of the Aadhaar biometric, the BMJDY bank account, and the extraordinary payments infrastructure that Dilip and the MPCI have built. But again, just to give our audience a sense of scale, I think we've got to a stage now where 1.2 billion people have Aadhaar, the biometric identity. Oh, welcome, Rajnish. Very nice to see you, sir.
I hope the analysts in the call today we declared the result, so I'm delayed a little bit. Sorry, apologies.
No problem at all. No problem at all. The other thing that I find very impressive, and it's perfect that Rajnish walked in at this stage, of course, in those 380 million PMJDY accounts, the average balance is $36. And, you know, we should underestimate that. It is extraordinary. Most countries, very poor people, which are the owners of these PMJDY accounts, do not have that sort of savings, that sort of balance in their account. So that is also a phenomenal achievement. And then when we turn to the payment system, if we look at what MPCI has done, in May alone, there were 405 million APS, so Aadhaar-enabled payment system transactions, and over 1,234 million UPI transactions. So these numbers and the robustness of the system that has been built is extraordinary. And Rakesh, one more question before we bring in Dilip and Rajnish. Most people, most countries want to develop that type of robust digital financial infrastructure, but as we know, and India's been at it for well over a decade, it's not an easy task. What is the secret? How did India pull this off?
Graham, if you really look at the, as I said in my first opening remark, that we had the infrastructure in place, which was that the Aadhaar system and the accounts that were opened in the banking system and the payment system, which was the technology which has been there. But there is one more thing that problem that in a country, when you're looking at the scale, the one problem that will come to you, to anybody who's trying to design a system, is that you have to link the banking or the financial institution with the public. Now here the problem is that the brick and mortar bank, which is, if you really look at the brick and mortar bank in any country, in India, because of the historical region and because of the economics, less than 20% villages have the brick and mortar bank. Now, the question that is in front of you is that how do you kind of link the banking system with the people, despite your having the account, having the digital identification number, and also having the technology in place? So what in 2006, the Reserve Bank of India, which is the Central Bank of India, did was that it passed a legislation allowed for the banking agent. Now this innovation, that the banking agent can reach the people without having a bank and brick and mortar bank at any place. Now India today have around million plus banking agent, which follow an approach of a few villages. Now they would go to village, do the necessary banking services, and are an important link between the banks as well as the people. So if that is being the case, the other thing which also happened, which any country should look at and should work on it, is that whether if you have an infrastructure where you can link people with the banking system. In Indian case, what we did was that the postal system was transformed into the financial banking system, on which India has 136,000 post offices, and they were transformed into the financial institution, into bank, and they become Indian Postal Payment Bank, and they have 186,000 handheld devices. So if you really look at all this infrastructure that was put in place already, for any country that we want to follow, you have to follow some of the basic things. Provide the digital identification, provide the link to the banking system, bring the banking system to the doorstep of people by either working on the bank agent or working through your other sources which was there lying idle, like in our case, not fully utilized like the post offices, and therefore turning them into the postal banking, payment banking system. It is all this combination. I will not omit that it will also have the huge stride that the country has to make in the interoperability of the payment system, and also the cost of the data transfer has to be cheap. People have to have the penetration in terms of the mobile. And it is all this combination that a country want to copy or a country want to move forward in this, so that on a click of a button you can transfer huge amount of money. Then you have to put all these things in place.
Phenomenal. Yeah, yeah.
Graham, we are very happy that Mr. Amitabh Kant has joined, and I'm
Splendid.
आप कैमरा आप इस आप कैमरे इस पर है सर, आप जूम करके रखें कैमरे।
My sincere apologies. Actually, I got caught up in a meeting in Prime Minister's office, so I got really late for this. And my sincere apology, but Rakesh Ranjan will do a good job, and all distinguished people are here. I just saw Dilip, I saw Mr. Rajnish there, and all very, very distinguished people. They are bigger experts and more knowledgeable than I am. So, good to have very knowledgeable people here.
Super. Thank you so much for joining us. And we still have questions for you, of course. For now, though, I'd like to bring in, if I may, Dilip, MPCI, the National Payments Corporation of India, is, of course, or perhaps I'll ask Dilip to talk about it, but it's brought together by the different banks in India and has built an extraordinary array of payment systems based on Aadhaar, has helped with RuPay cards, the unified payments interface, and so on. The journey must have been extraordinarily hectic, but it has been extraordinarily successful. Dilip, do you want to talk a little bit about what the key enablers and the key milestones have been for MPCI's journey?
Which is the question?
Yeah, thanks, Graham, and good evening to all of you. About 10 years back, about 10, 11 years back, there were two significant things happened in the Indian financial system, and also in the government. One was the government set up the Unique ID organization, and it had a role to create the Aadhaar numbers and the authentication mechanism. And also RBI, along with the leading banks in the country, started a retail umbrella entity for the retail payments. So obviously it's a lot of work, and a lot of hard work has been gone. Then the Aadhaar actually enrolled all 1.2 billion population, and the banks worked very hard to make this entity NPCI successful. And along with that, in 2014-15, the banks, along with the government, worked again very, very hard to build up the 400 million PMJDY accounts for the poor. So I think whatever you are trying to see now, whatever has happened in the payment system is actually kind of a network effect of, this 3-4 things which you are seeing, and I keep saying this, and I will say that again, that, the banks of this country has built one of the best fintechs like NPCI in this country. We still consider ourselves as a startup. And if you look at the NPCI journey, and actually we looked at all the aspects of the, because Indian population is fairly diverse. This country is fairly complex. So there are about 200 million people, 100 million people which has a smartphone, which has a 4G connection, and which can do transactions on their own self-service mode. So we have payment systems like UPI and RuPay, which are very indigenous systems derived in India. We have another 200, 300 million people who obviously has a bank account and mobile phone, but a feature phone. And they kind of rely back on some in the assisted mode to do a transaction. So there comes the Aadhaar enabled payment systems. The government supports them with the programs like direct benefit transfers for their livelihood. And also we have still, the penetration can go to the another 200, 300 people in due course, because they have the bank account, they have the Aadhaar number, and they might get the mobile in due course. So that is the opportunity for all of us to further scale up. So as I said, it's a lot of hard work of last 10 years, which we are seeing the results right now. And I think as far as India is concerned, and you'll have to give a credit to RBI and the government to think about it. We operate one of the most efficient payment systems, what you can call about. The direct benefit transfer, the government sends money in the morning to the bank, and in the evening the money is back available to the customer for use. We most of the payment systems, I would say that most of the payment system we settle multiple times during the day, and the funds are settled on a near real time basis. Like most of the leading payment systems worldwide do the next day settlement or 2 day T+2 settlements, while we, even on the card-based payment systems or UPI or whatever the payment systems, these are the real, we do the settlements faster. And obviously, we have the world-class payments rail, which we have built up, which are, I think it can only grow. That is what I believe.
Extraordinary. So the fantastic collaboration between the central bank and all the banks in India. And I just want to reiterate something that I find very important, which is that you've catered for all strata of society, whether they have a smartphone, whether they have a basic phone, or even whether they have no phone at all, because those who have no phone at all can go to agents and cash out using the Aadhaar-enabled payment system. So it's not, as we find with many fintechs, catering primarily to the elite with smartphones. And I think that is a phenomenal achievement. Now, a key part of that, of course, is the agent network. And perhaps the largest manager of the agent networks is with us in the form of the State Bank of India and Rajnish. And again, thank you so much for taking time from your schedule for us, sir. SBI, I mean, it has 20,000 branches across the country, something like that, I believe, and service nearly 500 million Indian citizens. A public sector bank, and I've always been amazed at how nimble a bank of that size, and particularly a public sector bank of that size, SBI has consistently demonstrated it to be nimble and to be able to leverage the type of things that Dilip has just talked about, the huge array of payment systems, for example, that MPCI have offered. You've also developed this agent network, and I wondered if you talk a little bit about how SBI has ensured that you've managed to maximize the leverage of the MPCI and also optimize your huge agent network.
Yeah, thank you. And as you rightly mentioned, that State Bank today we have a branch network of more than 22,000 branches. And this happened after the merger of our associate banks on 31st March 2017. So just to give you a little bit of a background about our journey, what is that we started networking our branches sometimes in 2004. And we completed this task in 2008, where all our branches across the country in most difficult locations, they got network. Otherwise, before 2004, all the branches were standalone branches. And ATMs were also standalone. So core banking solution, which we implemented in 2004 onwards, that was itself, I would consider to be a miracle, because we have branches even in Ladakh and all the upper reaches of Himalayas, and we have not. And three major things, or rather four major things happened after that. One was establishment of NPCI, parallelly establishment of UAIDI, Unique Identification Authority, which issued Aadhaar card, which is the unique identification number. And 2014, when PM Modi came in, so all these Jan Dhan accounts, which has become a very now well-known term, even it is a Hindi term, but across the globe, I think that is understood. And today, SBI, we have almost a 30% share of accounts in PM Jan Dhan accounts. And apart from 22,500 branches, this BC business correspondent model, it also came around 2011 or 2012, when Reserve Bank of India first time permitted business correspondent. So I would say that starting from the core banking network which bank started creating from 2004 onwards, I'm talking about public sector bank. Our private sector counterparts did it bit and they did not have any legacy, but we had legacy. But that is how, starting from 2004, first the core banking and creating the network, and then Unique Identity Authority, and then NPCI, then India Stack. That was another initiative, and this was all part of all these initiatives are part of India Stack. So this was a combination of all these factors that we have created an ecosystem. And this ecosystem, I would say, it is a very fine example of private-public partnership, where government is there, the public sector banks like us, and in India, the 65% assets are still owned by public sector banks, and they are at the forefront of providing and opening these Jan Dhan accounts. 99% accounts are with the public sector banks. The financial inclusion initiative of Reserve Bank of India, which permitted business correspondent channel, and today State Bank, we have 62,000 bank mitras. We call it bank mitras, means bank means friends or an intermediary. So effectively, if you look at the physical presence of State Bank alone, there are 62,000 customer service points managed by our business correspondent partners, 22,500 branches, 58,000 ATMs, 300 million RuPay cards. The cards issued again, which are used on NPCI platform. And then the mobile, the GEM Trinity, which is Jan Dhan accounts, Aadhaar, and mobile Trinity. So the entire ecosystem now, it is integrated, and that is what has enabled that even when at the time of COVID and Garib Kalyan Yojana PM announced, and then there has been a transfer of, you mentioned $7 or 500 rupees. And even in the age of social distancing, this was the integrated ecosystem which enabled very quickly the transfers from government to the banks and banks to the accounts of beneficiaries. So I handle about, say for example, 65 million women Jan Dhan account. And we have the capacity that in 5 days, we are able to credit all the 65 million accounts. So that is the scale at which infrastructure created by SBI is operating. And I won't say that it is an easy task, but now, because one in India, all numbers are big. There is no question of any small numbers. So if you have more than 1.3 billion people, so every number has to be big. And today, in fact, in my analyst call, I mentioned that State Bank of India serves the number of customers which are higher than the population of Latin America, entire continent. So that is the kind of scale at which we operate. But I think it's a very robust architecture, and it is not possible to have this architecture unless all the initiatives which I mentioned and the telecom revolution which happened in the country. So that is, again, without telecom infrastructure, we could have not created none of these. But today we have one of the best payment system, and which can reach each and every corner of the country. And we have the capability to transfer the entire banking system, even small payments, to a very, very large number of beneficiaries. So I think this is one of the most successful initiative, I would say, of the government, where the financial inclusion initiative, which was taken in a big way by our Prime Minister on 15th August 2014. I remember the date when he announced PM Jan Dhan Yojana. And today, as a result of that vision, we are able to take care of the people who are otherwise at the bottom of the pyramid. And the average balance in State Bank of India, one is that almost 90% accounts are active accounts. And the average balance is about $30 plus. That is the average balance in this accounts. And about like how did we manage this in the BC channel, it is all one, the processes around how do these BCs work. So bank has a very strong mechanism. We have all the SOPs in place. The oversight, it is required on BC channel so that no irregular practices develop. So all that mechanism is very strong, but we keep them incentivized. So not only it serves the poor people, but it also creates employment for these poor people. All these BC channels are being managed by the people who are relatively not so, affluent or prosperous, but in the process, it has generated huge employment for even the people who manage our BC customer service points.
Super. Well, thank you very much. It's a great overview. And that concludes our topic 2 on establishing the India digital financial infrastructure. And now I'd like to go to topic 3, practical insights from rolling out the emergency cash support transfers. As we've noted earlier, India has close to 1 million what is known in India as business correspondents. I think the rest of the world know them as cash in, cash out agents. They have processed around about 50% of the cash out transactions under the new emergency cash support payments that the government is making. I'd like to turn to Shri Amitabh Kant, if I may, sir, and ask you, the payments were made to the beneficiaries in April and May this year, and they were in progress for June. What are are the challenges that the government has faced over the last 3 months in this enormous effort?
So there were very, very major challenges because access to ATMs and bank mitras were very severely constrained by the COVID-19 pandemic, and there were restrictions on mobility as well as locations. And you know, if you go by the Reserve Bank of India figures, only 45,000 out of India's 230,000, that is less than about 20% of ATMs are in rural areas. So you can understand the challenges. There are last mile outreach challenges. Less than 15% of villages in India have a brick and mortar bank branch. And this makes it very difficult for agents making, you know, the agents are the only transaction points in many villages. And rural India definitely faced constraints in accessing benefits, even when schemes are extremely well targeted. We were able to bridge some of this gap with the doorstep financial service delivery, and this was possible because of India Post Payment Banks. They have a concept of dark savers and they have a robust business correspondent agent network. So between, if you look back between 24th of March and 23rd of April, post offices in India delivered about $54 million in over 2.1 million transactions, mostly in rural and unbanked areas. This was done through a network of 136,000 post offices equipped with about 186,000 handheld devices. Look at the size and scale of it. 136,000 post offices equipped with about 186,000 handheld devices. And on the other hand, close to 1 million agents cater to over 340 million people in face-to-face transactions day in and day out. You know, we run a program from this institution, the NITI Aayog. It covers the most backward districts of India, which we don't call them backward, we call them the aspirational districts of India. And, you know, they do this face-to-face transactions day in, day out in aspirational districts. And we knew overcrowding at agent points was increasing exposure to infection. An agent will typically interact with 80 to about 100 beneficiaries per day during the days of payments. We rolled out several guidelines. We laid down very strict social distancing norms, and we supported payments to agents for maintaining hygiene at their kiosks. This sudden spike in transaction traffic owing to the direct benefit transfer withdrawals also put pressure on the AEPS infrastructure, where failure was slightly higher than other digital payment challenges. Now, one of our key things was that an effective grievance resolution mechanism was also very, very critical because of this. It built trust amongst the customers if the queries, if the queries are resolved quickly and accurately, and it also helps continuously improve the program design. This is very critical. Just to give you one example, the government of Rajasthan, for instance, runs a very powerful program. It's called the Bhamsha scheme. And the state government has set up the Rajasthan Sampark portal, which is an online, it is a Sampark portal, which is an online registration system for grievances relating to very, very specific schemes. Beneficiaries can easily go to the CICO agents and register their grievances on this portal. The assessment of the scheme shows that less than 1% of the households actually were registering complaints, but this model was available. In aspirational districts, we see there is a need for our viewers, and we are making a very honest perspective and a very honest, appraisal of all this. In aspirational districts, we see that there is a need for streamlined grievance mechanisms that are tailored for the pro-poor products, which are, which are easily accessible and user-centric for low-income users. It is important to scale up and replicate such feedback, and feedback is really critical during these times. Replicate such feedbacks and grievance loop in any G2P program. This is our perspective.
Yeah, I mean, some fascinating insights in that. And one that resonates particularly with me is the importance of ensuring that CICO agents, our business correspondents, are not vectors, are not super spreaders, but instead are models. And I've seen the photographs of the sort of white circles for people to stand in while they're waiting for their payments. And I know that several banks as well have made payments to their agents to allow them to buy sanitizer and masks and so on. And I think SBI and others did that. And also even the Bank of Baroda is recognizing that they have additional liquidity management challenges and have to travel more often to rebalance, and is making a payment of about $1.5 to their agents for that. So some really important lessons there, I think. And also, I think I'm right in saying that there's been a significant increase in the use of agents as a function of this, not least of all, as you say, because people have been unable to get to bank branches and ATMs. Rajnish, sir, how have you managed these cash transfers at the very last mile? And have you seen sort of regional variations? And what did you have to do to support your more remote branches and agents? I think you're on mute, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So, because the accounts are fairly spread uniformly across the country, and so is the BC channel. In most of the geographies, we have adequate number of customer service points. So one was that when this COVID started and when the Prime Minister announced the direct transfer of 500 rupees. So one is that all our BC channel, one is that we do it through corporate. These are all corporate BC channels. So we don't deal directly with the 62,000 BC channels on our own. So the corporate BC is, of course, one is that we approached and we told them that whatever it takes to put in all the safety measures in place. So whatever safety measures we are taking at the branches of our own, same safety measures should be available to the BCs. Second was we also announced the cash support for this extra expenditure and the extra work we are doing. And third is, of course, because all these BC points or CSP, customer service points, so there are linkages to all our branches across the country. So each of the customer service point, at least 10, 12 of them, would be linked to one of our branches for the supply of cash. So that cash logistics, we thought initially that it may become a challenge, but most of the geographies it did not, excepting wherever there were some tight curfew restrictions by the local authorities, but because this was classified as essential service by the Ministry of Home Affairs. So more or less the cooperation from all the local authorities, it was forthcoming, and that is where the local authorities cooperated with the banking system fully, and that is how, whether it was this channel or our ATM channel, we did not face any problem. Our ATM channel, they operated about 92% availability pre-COVID, and they are during COVID also 92% availability. The number of transactions, of course, with BC channel handled, and it was on a few days, it exceeded about 3.5 million. And whereas at the branch, it is normally we handle about 2 million transactions, but during COVID period, it came down to about 1.2 million. And that way, the BC channel was a big support. And for social distancing, in fact, the Home Ministry as well as our Department of Financial Services Secretary. So individually, they spoke to all the chief secretaries and requested them that during this period when the people would come to take payment, so we have to maintain the social distancing norms. That is where you see all the circles. And one innovation which we did, and this was only during the course of discussions, we were trying to work out that how do we spread the crowd. And then it came out that we will go by the last digit of their account number. And this was from Indian Banks Association side, and through all communication channels, it was communicated that the payments would be made spread over 5 days. So anyone who was having, wherever the sorry, account number was ending with 1, 2, they were served on day 1, 3, 4, they were served on day 2. So like that, I think this was a very good thought which suddenly came up during those discussions when we were trying to solve this problem. And in fact, because State Bank, we always have problem of crowding of our branches. So now we are thinking that something on this, even for our regular transaction, whether we can adopt and tell our customers that this is the protocol now we will follow even at our branches and decongest our branches.
So, Greta, thank you for being. So, go ahead, sir.
No, yeah, please.
So, Greta, so much for waiting patiently, and Harry even more so. Greta, for emergency cash support payments that you've seen across the globe in other countries as well, what are the best practices that you feel that governments should learn, particularly in the context of getting these payments out to rural areas?
Thank you, Graham, and good evening to everyone in India, and good morning and good afternoon to those of us in other parts of the world. It's a great honor to be here with you today. So on the first question, I think, and a lot of people have touched on this, but maybe I can kind of put the pieces together. We need to think of this as a chain. So you have to identify who needs help, get the help to them efficiently, and avoid losses along the way. And you need to get things to people in a location, in a format where they can access the money. And that sounds sort of simple when put like that, but apparently it's not. You just have to take a look around at what's happened to efforts in the United States to get money to people who need it, both through our state-run unemployment systems as well as the payroll protection program, to realize just how complex it is to get money out to people in a very targeted way. And I think there are a few key factors that have to be in place. Obviously upstream, you need good targeting mechanisms. You need IDs, the ability to deduplicate, and a payments architecture that can knit together a list of beneficiaries with bank or wallet accounts that you want to pay into. You need a core payment system like India has developed very well, an ID system also very well developed in India. You need directories, you need mappers that can connect people on lists with actual accounts. And I think India has really done a lot of that particularly well. But downstream is equally important. And here, distribution and incentives, I think, are really key. So people do need to have a bank account or a mobile wallet. And if these aren't in place, you have to be able to onboard people quickly, either through remote account opening or verifiable over-the-counter transactions. And you need distribution partners, as many have spoken about today, with locations for cash withdrawal close to customers. And you ideally need to have some degree of interoperability so that customers can choose where to get their payments, and so that's close to and convenient for them. And then you need ways of managing the liquidity flow so it doesn't surge through the system all at once and have people standing in long queues to collect their cash, particularly at a time like this when crowds are not advisable. And then finally, and a couple of people have touched on this as well, people need to know that the cash is waiting for them and when and where they can come pick it up. And I think one complicating factor, and I'll speak to what the experience has been in some other countries, because I think we've covered India pretty well. But one complicating factor is who's responsible for the upstream and who's responsible for the downstream. The upstream is pretty clearly controlled by governments in all cases. But as you get into downstream distribution, this can be done through a variety of different arrangements. So in some countries, it is done by government-controlled entities, and in others, it's been done via partnership agreements with the private sector, either implemented by larger entities or, in a more direct way. So the model in Africa has been largely getting money out through private partnerships. And then in some countries, you have a hybrid solution for the downstream, as has been the case in Indonesia and to some extent in India. But if the incentives aren't right, you can really have a mess on your hands. So I can give you a few examples of this, right? So if you look at South Africa, the SASA program there has been sort of plagued by problems from the start. First, there were issues in how the contracts were awarded and problems with what looked like not very clean award processes. They eventually decided to cancel that contract and distribute payments through the post office, but that hasn't worked ideally either because there just aren't enough distribution points in the country. And actually, many people are accustomed to transacting through big retail chains in South Africa. So they're right now trying to figure out how to do this differently. Unfortunately, they're having to do it under the conditions of a pandemic. And so it's been a bit of a struggle to get cash out to people because they haven't really figured out how to incentivize those downstream distribution bits. They really put customers at the center of what you're trying to do. Bangladesh is another country that we've been looking at where the pieces are in place. A lot of those pieces that we've talked about are in place, but the incentives aren't quite there for making the public-private interface line up well. And as we think about moving these payments to your second question, increasingly into rural areas, then you really do have to think about multiple channels and providers because in many countries, reaching rural areas is pretty tough to do from an economic point of view. So maybe just three quick thoughts about how you can do that a little bit better and what the experience has been in some other countries. So firstly, you really need to look for ways to leverage different kinds of distribution providers, right? So agents managed by banks and independent agent network managers have been pretty effective in terms of getting out to rural areas in a market like Colombia. I used to work in Latin America and, previously payments were only distributed by the state-owned Banco Agrario and they cost the state $10 per transaction. But by opening up the competition for being able to be part of it, having multiple providers in the program now, and enabling them to work through agent networks has raised the efficiency of the Familias in Action program considerably, and it's given customers a lot more choice. And the capillarity in rural areas is really high, which is important because Colombia has one of the largest internally displaced populations in the world. Secondly, authorizing a wider range of e-money issuers can also make a big difference. So if you take a look at Indonesia right now, the only way you can get cash out to people is through agents that are managed by banks. If Indonesia were to enable cash out by non-bank e-money issuers, it could increase its cash out footprint by a factor of about 6, we estimate, by bringing in e-commerce and ride-hailing agents into the picture. And some countries are looking at doing this now. The Philippines, for example, is currently looking at distributing payments, not just through the banking sector, but via Paymaya and GCash, which are e-money issuers in that country. And then finally, and I think this is really important, you really do have to think about incentivizing providers to get payments out to those in less profitable areas in ways that won't subtract from amounts that beneficiaries ultimately receive. And a really interesting case in point on this is the Inua Jamii program in Kenya. It's developed a tiered fee structure that incentivizes providers to get funds into rural areas by compensating them more for payments to those areas. And for scale, I mean, it's nothing like India. Kenya's a much smaller country, but about 1.2 million Kenyans participate in that program, and 200,000 of them live in rural areas. And in Kenya, rural is really rural, right? And it's very hard to get payments out to them. And this tiered structure seems to work pretty well. Zambia has similar pricing incentives, but the motivation in that case is to make sure that benefits aren't reduced or eroded in any way by cash out fees. The other thing that's really interesting about the way that Kenya handles it is that the government doesn't get into sort of micromanaging the way private sector providers deliver those funds. They leave the liquidity management challenges, the agent network challenges to them. The government simply verifies that a payment's been received based on whether a cash out's taken place, and they pay that fee only after that cash out has taken place. So it's a pretty efficient system. So there are lots of different ways of managing this, but I think a lot of it is about connecting that upstream and that downstream and making sure, particularly if you have the private sector engaged, and I think it is useful to get the private sector engaged in the downstream distribution to make sure that it's properly incentivized to get those payments out quickly and efficiently.
That is a really good world tour in rapid time. Thank you very much indeed, Greta, and some great insights there. I hope that as people watching, and I understand that we have 2,400 people watching this webinar. So thank you for watching, and thank you for joining us. And please do be aware that we will put the recorded version on the website soon. That leads us very neatly to topic 4. I'm asking the question, learn from India. MSC, my little company, runs study tours and has run study tours for about a dozen countries into India. We have Indonesia and Bangladesh, for example, implementing eKYC inspired by India. Nigeria implementing the payments bank model, again, inspired by India. There's so much to learn, I think, from this country. And I think at the heart of that, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has played a tremendously critical role. And so I'd like to bring Harry in now and ask him, you know, in this time of epidemic, countries have been facing a range of constraints of getting these cash transfer benefits to vulnerable people. What do you think the key differences that have allowed India to press the button and, as was said, and just make the payments so easily, and what should other countries learn from that?
Thanks a lot, Graham, and thanks to NITI Aayog and MicroSave for bringing together all of us to discuss this important topic, and thanks for the opportunity. So, as all the speakers before have said, I mean, there's a lot that India got right, but I think the key point Rakesh ji made right at the beginning, and which is also captured in the narrative subsequently, is it's not like, you know, this press the button happened overnight. You know, there was a lot of deliberate design choices that went into what India built, which allowed the system to operate and reach a very large number of people in, you know, rapid time, you know, at a time of need. So back to your point of, you know, preparation, meeting, you know, opportunities, what luck is, right? So I'd say there are 3 elements of what India has done, and you know, there are lots of elements on the technology side. But if I were to pick one, I'd say building the digital infrastructure as a public good. I think that is a key differentiator. That's actually a huge lesson for other countries that intend to go down this path. And when I say that, I mean, you know, the India stacks that Rajnish and Dilip both mentioned earlier. You know, the foundational layers that you needed for this digital infrastructure, identity, payments, and data were all built as a you know, interconnected series of goods using very sophisticated technology architecture, and it was built with that public good principle in mind. Linked to that, the government's own payment systems, you know, the public finance management system, or the PFMS, which you know, connects the central, state governments, banks, and other agencies, that was also engineered in a way that it was set up to enable these large-scale payments. And you know, the PFMS right now manages the payments of over 1,800 government schemes and interfaces with over 350 banks. And so all of this came together with that public good mindset. And I think that helped lower the cost of doing business for all entities. And I think the creation of utilities like NPCI was also critical to make sure that the public good element never got deprioritized. I mean, innovation that originates in different parts of the system can be used for multiple objectives. I think an important lesson is India always kept that public good at the heart of where this innovation was headed. So that's one point. A second point that I would say is India's design of the digital financial inclusion systems focused very intentionally on both inclusion as well as empowerment. So you didn't focus only on the people who had the smartphones and how they could do things in an easier way. But again, as Dilip ji mentioned, there was a focus on people who had feature phones. How could they benefit? And also people who did not have any phones. The examples that were given of how doorstep delivery by India Post was enabled, and that serviced a large need. Similarly, Amitabh ji mentioned the aspirational districts. I mean, there were deliberate attempts made to make sure that the digital financial inclusion architecture went to these districts that have some of the most marginalized populations, and that's been an area where we've been able to work with the NITI Aayog. I'd say linked to that also this focus on distribution, and Rajnish mentioned that the network of CICO agents, over 1.4 million of them, who've actually gone taken inclusion to the doorstep of households. Uh, and an equally important thing I think is the focus on gender disaggregated data. So when the government announced a scheme to put money into the accounts of women, you actually knew exactly which those accounts were. So having that disaggregated data has also allowed the government to design and implement schemes specifically for groups that need them, women, senior citizens, etc. So that's a second point, the focus on both inclusion and empowerment. And I'd say the third and final point I want to make is all of this technology was then put to use to benefit, citizens, the community at large, government, as well as the private sector. Rohini Nilekani, the Indian philanthropist, she often talks about, the three legs of India, if you think of it as a tripod: Samaj, Bazaar, and Sarkar. So I think the financial inclusion journey in India has benefited all of these, and that's because the government developed use cases to benefit common citizens. You didn't just leave it at okay, there's the jam trinity, but you also looked at the Bapu model that Graham, I know your team are very familiar with. The biometric authentication with physical uptake, which allowed you to connect this digital infrastructure to the delivery of physical products, and that's what's enabled India's public distribution system to actually supply grains to over 800 million people. So and similarly, large scale digitization of government schemes, and then a private sector that's been able to ride on the infrastructure that NPCI has created. So you have a very thriving public, private payments infrastructure, which is driving innovation. So I think this focus on all three layers has also been an important differentiator. And I'd say the final point is, for any such endeavor to succeed, you need strong political will and leadership. I think that's always been forthcoming at the topmost levels of government, through the Department of Financial Services, the NITI Aayog, and lots of other entities. And I'd say also the role of a very progressive, forward-looking, regulator in the form of the central bank, which has worked to make sure that the regulatory framework has adapted to the possibilities that technology has continued to offer. So, that dynamism has also been an important factor for what India has been able to achieve. Graham, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. That's a really good overview, Hari. Thank you very much indeed. And perhaps we ought to just mention Jan Dhan's book, Rebooting India, because I think that laid out a lot of the ideas and blueprint for some of the things that are now being implemented. And if people overseas want to see what you could potentially do basis a biometric identity system, That is an extraordinarily easy to read introduction. So thank you so much. Greta, you've interacted with governments trying to implement these type of systems. How does India's journey compare with other governments? And yeah, what are the key lessons again that they should be learning?
You know, I'd like to echo something that Harry said and maybe add something onto it before I get into the actual response to your question, Graham, because I think this point about India building this infrastructure as a public good is absolutely crucial. And it is not completely unique, but in its entirety, I think it really is unique. And I think it's pretty inspiring for a lot of other countries. And the one element that I think sits on top of it is that it really enables competition. So you're sort of taking away this winner takes all approach that sort of lives in digital ecosystems a lot of the time, and you're requiring big companies to come in and compete on the quality of their service, which I think is really quite unique. And so I think India really is to be congratulated on this infrastructure and architecture that is built for getting payments out to people. But more to the point of your question, Graham, you know, what this crisis I think is making really clear is that countries that invested in building this kind of infrastructure, and as others have said, it's by no means a simple investment, have done relatively well in getting money out to people, right? I'm not sure anybody's knocked that 100% out of the park, although what I read about places like Germany and Switzerland, maybe they fit the bill. But there are a number of countries that have done pretty well, and what they all have in common is that they have invested over a number of years in this kind of infrastructure in different pieces, and they've done a good job at knitting them together, right? So India is certainly one of them. The infrastructure, particularly on the upstream side, has been really world class, and I think a lot of countries have taken inspiration from it. But you know, countries like Pakistan have many of the pieces in place to make large-scale cash transfers, as do places like Peru, Kenya, Colombia, and China, in fact. And what these countries have all got in common is that they invested very efficiently in that upstream architecture that makes it possible to target and send money to beneficiaries. And I think where things have been a little bit more patchy in most countries, including my own, has been in that distribution architecture. And you know, where I think you know, we need to do a little bit more work is making sure that we get good distribution infrastructure out to people. So I think others were mentioning, you know, 1.4 million agents or a number around that, but you know, that's for a population of 1.3 billion, right? So I think there's still more work that we have to do to manage that interface between upstream and private downstream delivery. But there are also really important lessons to be gained from countries that have not invested heavily in the necessary infrastructure. So countries that we're working with in places like Morocco and Lebanon fit that bill, and they're really struggling now to find ways to get payments out to people. And so, you know, it's not simple to build these kind of infrastructures, and doing it under the circumstances of a pandemic is almost impossible. I mean, everyone's looking at getting money out to people in the back of the truck. And then there are, you know, there's another category of countries that I kind of think of as in countries where there are pieces in place, but they haven't kind of cracked putting them together and getting the incentives right. So we talked about Indonesia before and how a pretty simple regulatory fix would really expand the number of cash out points. And Bangladesh could do a lot more to improve its targeting and ID systems and in incentivizing distribution providers, of which they have many and really good coverage across the country. So I think in addition to building all these pieces of infrastructure, it's really important to connect along the chain from treasury down to the end customer and make sure everybody's properly incentivized to deliver along the way.
Great. And just to sort of dig into that a little bit, Greta, our Indian journey is you know, long and still underway, I think, as you said. I mean, if we're honest, I think before this crisis, the agent infrastructure was typically underused. Now, clearly, a solution of this scale will take some time, but what should governments overseas, what are the quick wins that they can do now in a crisis like this? Because yeah, it's difficult, and I'm sure they don't want to wait, so to speak.
Yeah, Yeah, well, I mean, India is not unique in some of these challenges, right? And I think a lot of those challenges are really in the downstream side of the business, right? I think the centralized infrastructure is pretty good. There have been some bumps and hiccups around certain aspects of biometric verification and things like that. That's going to be normal, right? But I think having a really well distributed infrastructure to get payments in people's hands and to manage that customer interface, I think is really important. And so I think, the focus really needs to be on increasing the overall number of cash points, looking at ways to crowd in the private sector, looking at ways to building consumer choice. I really like the example of the postal service getting, payments out to people at their doorstep. I think that's really interesting. And I think finding ways to kind of crowd the private sector in is going to be important to making it work, just a wider range of providers. I know the payments banks, we're supposed to be part of cash in, cash out infrastructure in the country. I think that model has raised a few questions. I know Nigeria's picked it up, but I think it's been hard to make it work commercially. So I think there's still some tweaking that needs to happen there. And again, incentives across that are going to be really important to turbocharging. Ultimately, I think what you really want to do is think over the longer term about how you incentivize keeping money digital, so we're not having to move massive amounts of cash to people and having them queue up to get that cash. But if you can get accounts that you have in India and points of acceptance, which you increasingly have in India, you can keep that cash in digital circulation so that we don't have to worry about grubby cash in the time of a pandemic. And so I think there is a lot of thinking and work that could be done now on how you incentivize more digital payments, merchant payments. And I think UPI actually gives a lot of push to that as well, particularly in urban areas. But I think that's kind of where we want to head so that we build increasingly digital ecosystems and use this moment to get people comfortable with using them. I mean, if you take a look at M-Pesa in Kenya really took off because of election violence and everybody being locked in. And so people had to use it to send money around. So there are opportunities in crisis. And I think that, this moment is one where we can really think about building much more digital ecosystems. I think, other things that others have mentioned as well that are worth thinking about, I think there are fine tuning points that need to be made to the system too. Good systems for grievance redress is one of them. Making sure we have consumer protection in place, managing for inclusion and exclusion errors. But, that's just going to take time. Fraud is another one. We had a big fraud here in Washington State not that long ago in terms of unemployment benefits. It's a risk and it has to be managed. And I think, so in addition to low-hanging fruit, I think there are things that need to be done to just make sure you're fine-tuning as you go along.
Great. Okay, well, that's very helpful. And that takes us into topic 5, which is how can countries begin to build digital infrastructure? And I think Greta's absolutely right. How do we get it more effectively used? Can we seize the opportunity that the crisis offers? And Dilip, I wondered whether you would want to talk about a little bit about how COVID-19 has challenged the digital infrastructure and what will change in response to this experience and this emergency.
So Graham, we definitely see that, there is a change in consumer behavior and the consumer more and more preferring back to look at the contactless payments. He doesn't like the touch-based payments. So be it, using the UPI, scanning the QR code, we see definitely there is growth on QR code-based transactions at the retail stores. At the same time, we obviously NPCI, UIDI, and all the banks will have to create more such innovations. One such that we have been working with UIDI. Can we convert the UIDI content authentication with to support the what you call the contactless authentication and in the APS as well. So we have seen the link-based payments in UPI. So the merchant sends a link to the customer, and it kind of facilitates the in-app call, and it kind of facilitates the intent-based payments in UPI. Obviously, a lot of work has to be done. I think it's a great opportunity for us to kind of improve things, and we are trying to modulate our products to live in the post-COVID era. And obviously, we believe that the face-to-face payments may come down, the e-commerce may grow up substantially. That is what is our assessment is as of now. And next 1 year we'll see a huge growth in the e-commerce payments. Similarly, we have been again working on some of the, we have received the approval from RBI on standing instructions to be implemented on UPI as well as debit cards below 2,000 rupees transactions. So all the recurring payments can we look at the standing instructions to be enabled with the large merchants, the OTT platforms. So those are the work is in progress. We have been working with Reliance to enable UPI on a KaiOS, which is the proprietary operating system which is there for about 200 million plus Reliance Jio phones. So those are kind of things that we are looking at. Obviously, in India below 75% transactions are below 100 rupees transactions, which is like below less than $1.50 transactions. And there we are trying to see that initiatives like the contactless payment, which is using the National Common Mobility Card. We have designed the One Nation One Card, which has been inaugurated by Honorary Prime Minister, which we are working with the banks to drive that. So I believe the transit bill payments, it's still a very great opportunity for us to drive the digital payments. And, in the due course, you will see many use cases will come in. Obviously, when you look at the consumption, if you want to drive, you need a low cost digital product. And while credit cards have been there, the acquisition cost makes it very, very difficult for a credit card to be offered for a low credit, micro credit, for example, 1,000 rupees to 5,000 rupees. So you need a really high tech product which can offer the low cost, low value digital product, that can drive. And if that kind of credit is made available to about 100-200 million Indians, that can also drive the consumption story, which we believe. And there are two areas which we'll have to continuously work on, and keep seeking the help from the government, RBI, and the banks and ecosystem players. One is the awareness and education of the customer, because the shift from the no payments to the assisted mode to the self mode will drive much faster than we envisage. So which is a great opportunity, but which will also drive the challenges in terms of consumer phishing attacks and the literacy issues on customer not sharing the pins, OTPs, and those kind of things. And on the other side, the cyber security related challenges will also grow up, and we will have to continue to invest these two things, I think, to look at the opportunities. But I think we are very, very positive that it gives a great ground like demonetization to move towards digital payments, and we believe that next 200-300 million people. Initially, we were assuming that it might take next 3 to 5 years, but I don't see a reason why they cannot come on digital payments in next couple of years' time.
Wow, that's a wonderful vision. So I know that Amitabh ji has to leave very soon, and I want to ask one specific question that has been sent in, because I think it was almost specifically for him. Amitabh ji, there's a gentleman from Sudan who says, I have been following the Indian digitization journey very closely since 2014. It is inspirational. And worth replicating in many developing countries like mine, Sudan. Any ideas on how India could support other developing nations?
Thanks. Indeed, it is great to see the progress of India, particularly with the diversity that we have, and especially considering the fact that India is bigger than 25 countries of Europe, plus another 30,000 square kilometers. So the journey has not been easy. It's been a tough journey, as many of the panelists have also mentioned when they spoke about it. But some key milestones that I would like to highlight, one is that in 2006, the Reserve Bank, the central bank allowed business correspondent or banking agents to set up shop. And since then, the government, through the Ministry of Finance, have helped financial service providers develop a very robust network of bank agents. In 2015, the Prime Minister launched the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, that is a no-frills account with zero balance to increase access to bank accounts. Of the 380 million Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana bank accounts opened till date, around 53% accounts are in the names of women. And actually, during that period, 15 to 18, every second bank account across the world was opened in India. So the entire digital ecosystem developed, and in April 2020, close to 1 billion UPI and 403 million AEPS transactions have been enabled. 1 billion UPI and 403 million AEPS transactions have been enabled, and our target is to have 1 billion transactions per day, from a month, 1 billion transaction a month to 1 billion transaction a day. I would like to highlight that we also followed a full circle of design thinking while developing and implementing schemes. And I would like to share some multiple initiatives that we have taken, to spread our learnings and allow the exchange of knowledge and experience with all other developing countries. Actually, we have been facilitating exposure visits for interested countries to come to India and discuss with both the government and private sector about the experience and also see real implementation on the ground. We recognize that some countries need larger support in learning as well as execution. We are planning to formalize the learning process, and we will unfold this very shortly. We will facilitate learning, and we'll also have capacity to handle interested countries in implementing policies. Let us see how we take this forward. At NITI Aayog, we have anchored initiatives that are based on the principle of convergence of central and state schemes, collaboration of central state level Prabari officer, that's the officer who drives the scheme, and the district collector who's in charge of that particular district. We've also pushed for competition amongst districts. So basically, the principle of convergence, collaboration, and competition. One such initiative, as I mentioned, is the Aspirational District Program, where we identified the backward districts having low performance on multiple indicators. This program focuses closely on improving people's ability to participate fully in the growing and expanding economy, health and nutrition, education, agriculture, water resources, financial services, skill development, and basic infrastructure are the key focus areas. In several rounds of consultation with various stakeholders, we selected 49 key performance indicators that were chosen to measure progress of the districts. We capture the change every day, every single day, every minute to minute, and we put out the results on a monthly basis. My belief is that such programs help drive the results effectively, cohesively, and intensively because we are monitoring. These are all outcome-based programs. We believe such principles and programs should be adopted by other countries, and they will have a huge multi-dimensional impact on lifting people above the poverty line. And collectively, these schemes collectively work for the development of people. This is the broad perspective that I can share.
Super. So that sets it in the overall context and is really helpful. And I'm sure that the questioner from Sudan will be very pleased to hear that India is thinking about how it might provide support and study tours to see the India infrastructure. That will be much appreciated. Harry, in that context, I wonder what the sort of key elements that drive a digital financial infrastructure, apart from scalability, of course. What initiatives are the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation taking to help both perhaps in India and indeed elsewhere? If you'd care to talk about that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Graham. So, just quickly, I mean, the key elements that drive digital financial infrastructure, I think there's of course the technology part of it, but I think it's really about how do you make that technology usable for large numbers of the population, and how do you come up with use cases that benefit the most, because technology, if not deployed appropriately, can also have an exclusionary effect, right? So for the foundation, our belief is always guided by this notion that every life has equal value, and we want to make sure that technology solutions actually help bridge equity gaps and not widen them. So in terms of the work that we do in India and other countries, I think a few layers. One, of course, is learning from India's own successful approach to digital financial inclusion. It's looking at digital payments and digital finance as part of an overall reform agenda, which is also about social security, the delivery of essential government programs, and helping countries lay out that value chain or continuum. And that's something Greta also mentioned. So providing support in that is something we prioritize. We also look at the use case element. How do you make sure that any infrastructure that's put in place is usable, and how do you come up with use cases that benefit the people who are outside of the formal financial system? Because that's a lens that we take. Digital finance helping people in urban areas do cool things is all very nice, but the primary objective we are pursuing of alongside governments is really to get these advances to reach the people who are outside of the formal financial system. So helping develop use cases that benefit the poorest, that help benefit women in particular. So closing the gender gap, that's another important element. Because the delivery of government payments and government programs is a big element. We also work a lot on de-risking large government programs. How do you provide the data and the feedback loops on a relatively real-time basis to help inform the design and delivery of large government programs? We do that in many parts of the world. India, Indonesia, in partnership with your team, and many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Another important area of focus is something Greta mentioned, which is how do you create incentives and opportunities for the private sector to deliver innovation that poor and rural communities. Otherwise, usually the focus of private sector actors is focused on those who can pay, usually people who reside in urban areas. So helping come up with business models that can take the innovation that emerges from the private sector again to people that need them the most. And I guess the last one I'll say is just looking at ways to support this ecosystem of country to country collaboration and learning. India in many ways has leapfrogged and gotten to the forefront of what digital finance can offer countries. And we have been working in close partnership with the government to enable some learning visits for people from other countries, countries in Asia, Africa, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Nigeria. There's several such learning visits that have been enabled. Some of our partnerships with the World Bank, with CGAP, with ID4D, etc. It's also looking at opportunities to create this learning community, so countries can benefit from the innovation that might originate elsewhere. So those are the broad areas of support, and for us, all of it depends on partnerships, government, with development partners, with community groups, and with the private sector. So those are the areas of focus, and I think in a time of disruption, as evidenced by what's going on with COVID, I think the need for such partnerships is greater. So thanks so much for the opportunity, and thanks again to the NITI Aayog and MicroSave for bringing all of us together.
Well, thank you all for participating. I can tell you that we have 3,349 viewers right now, but we probably ought to wrap up. I'd like to just leave with one final question for Rakesh ji, but I think Harry may want to chip in as well. The digital divide is something that I think is really important, and in the Indian subcontinent, so not exclusively India, the exclusion of women is often a problem. What is India doing to ensure that women are also included in this infrastructure that you have built, sir?
You see, the moment
Start and then
the moment you transit from the physical to the digital world, the advantage that men might have over the years of history just vanishes. And in the digital world, all of us are same. That being the case, I will just give you two instances. That if you look at our transfer of the assistance during COVID-19, then what the government of India decided was to transfer the fund to the accounts which are held by women. So 200 million women account holders were supposed to were transferred fund through this. We have not left the senior citizen as well as the other vulnerable group, but in the thought process that, and this is where the psychology comes into the picture, that if you are trying to transfer the assistance, then it is our experience that if you transfer it in the name of or in the hands of the women, there is a greater chance of that being utilized in a more constructive, socially more constructive and family-wise more constructive manner. So that has been a very conscious decision by the government of India that we will look at the account. If you really look at the loan-based account, say Mudra, which is one of the good account for financial inclusion in India, which has been pursued very, very vigorously for the last 3 to 4 years. Number of accounts which are the smaller loan that you give for very micro entrepreneurs. The very large portion of that account where the loan was given for, very small loan was given for micro entrepreneurship goes to the women. So if you really look at, and as you say, because if there's a consciousness of this, and as I said, in digital world, we all are same. Everybody, men and women, have similar kind of capabilities. So what we look at this, that as you as you go by, in 2014, the difference between the account between men and women was 22%. In 2017, it has reduced to 15%. So it's a longest battle, and it need to be fought on all the front. But there is an unmistakable trend that the digital gap is being kind of handled and addressed in India.
Super, thank you so much. All right, so I think we've got time to close. Any final comments, Harry, before you leave? I know you have to get to another call. I apologize for detaining you.
No, I think I just want to underline the importance and, retaining the emphasis on making sure the gender gap, is adequately addressed, even in terms of use cases. I think now in terms of access to accounts, I think that part has been, but, clearly in terms of access to mobile phones, there remains a gap. And as more and more we look at applications that can be delivered through phones, that's another one that needs to be looked at. Also, as women take on, more formal roles in, small scale enterprises, in agriculture, again, looking at how would you design, schemes and programs to benefit them specifically. So I think that's another area that certainly requires, more thought and attention. And that's something that, we look forward to working with the government and many partners. I think the good part is, everyone is focused on solving these problems. So I don't think there's any need for demand generation. I'd say a final point is, I think Greta mentioned this earlier. How do we, continue to work on the demand side to get people more and more comfortable with the idea of digital currency? And for offering the sense of security that will let people leave money in digital accounts without the need to continue, withdraw it and take it out. So I think that involves important elements of what are norms that signal a sense of financial security to people. There's also questions around privacy, security, etc. But that's another important area on which I think work needs to be done. We have a great partnership with the NITI Aayog. In fact, current discussions about how could we look at some of these behavioral elements in a post-lockdown scenario for India, and those are discussions we've been having with Rakesh ji and team. Certainly in India, that's an area that we are looking at. So those are my final thoughts. Thanks, Graham.
Super. Thank you so much again for joining us, Harry. Dilip, final thoughts? When unmuted.
I think we still have a huge opportunity, as Mr. Kant said and Mr. Rajnish Kumar said. I think we have a still huge, long way to go. So I don't think we want to celebrate the victory as of now. We have a long long road to be traveled, and a lot of challenges. And I'm sure all of the entire ecosystem will cope up to deal with the challenges.
Great. Thank you so much, Dilip. Greta, I know you have to run. Apologies for keeping you. Any final thoughts to close us out?
I think just as others have said, I mean, I think what India has achieved is phenomenal, and the public good aspects of it in particular make it almost unique. And I think just continuing to fine tune, work towards full digitization, work towards full inclusion. This isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, right? And so I think we just keep building this infrastructure and making it better. And I think India is an inspiration for a lot of other countries. So well
thank you so much. Thank you so much. Rakesh ji, as a host of this webinar, final words to you, sir.
Thank you. As I will pick up from what Hari has said, that a lot need to be done on the demand side generation, because if we have put something on the supply side, then it is the economic efficiency demands that the demand side must be pretty decent. So the big aspect which is going to take place is the behavioral change that we are looking at it. I mean, in India, the behavioral change is two aspects. One is the awareness part of it, because in good part of the world, the awareness may be there, but the behaviorally, you don't do it. But in India, we have kind of both the challenges and at the same time, both the opportunities. So if you take the awareness to the people that, yes, this is possible, this is so simple, and this empowers you, I think the behavioral change will take place. And we see that we can take this adversity of COVID-19 and see to it that this becomes one of the good thing one of the things for which we can push the financial inclusion and the digital mode for the financial inclusion to the place where we can generate the economic efficiency with a sense of justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And with that, we'll close and thank all the thousands of people that joined us on this webinar. And thank again our esteemed panel. Really appreciate your time in these very, very busy days. Thank you very much, and good night to India. Good morning to the US, and good afternoon from Europe. Thank you very much indeed.